Hello there, and welcome to Grant24678. A moment ago I was looking through some old files of mine and came across this story I wrote starring the Second Doctor, Jamie and Victoria. And it was a really good story, and I was hoping to publish it or do something with it. I'm always writing stories, it's not something new. Always trying to make money, so always writing stories. But this one was very good, and I thought I'd read it out to you. Here we go. It's called The Last Breath. Victoria screamed as the knight smashed his way through the door. She was trapped and alone. Her eyes span around the room looking for some sort of weapon, but there were none. Another piece of wood flew through the air as the bloodthirsty knight hacked away at the door. Victoria screamed once more, knowing full well it would not help the situation. The axe cracked into the wood again, shattering even more door across the room. He slammed his axe down on the lock, and the door flew open. The knight strolled into the room, as if all his anger had just flown away. He lifted his axe up. Victoria slammed her eyes shut, but to her surprise, nothing happened. She opened one eye and was relieved to find the knight dead on the floor. She looked around for the answer, and met Jamie's eyes. He stood in the doorway, sword in hand, and smiling warmly. Victoria flung her hands around Jamie and sobbed. The trip back to the TARDIS was met with caution. They crept silently down the passages, hoping not to bump into any more unwelcome foes. Jamie eyed the corridors carefully. If he was honest with himself, he didn't really know where the TARDIS was. Suddenly they both heard footsteps and snuck into an alcove. Jamie held his sword upright, ready to attack anyone who might hurt Victoria. The man passed by them, and instantly they both recognized him. The Doctor. The Doctor, Jamie and Victoria hurried along in search of the TARDIS. The castle dungeons were a dark and cold place. The stone floor was hard and uncomfortable to sleep on. In the corner of one of the cells was a man named Cedric. He had helped the Doctor escape, and now he lay alone in the icy cell. He knew that death was soon upon him. The guards had not fed him for several days. They intended him to die. He rested his head against the stone wall and fell into a sleepy daze. When Cedric woke, he was in a brightly lit room, lying in a comfy bed. The walls were covered with strange shapes which repeated all the way around the room. To his side sat Victoria, who was reading. Cedric sat up, and Victoria immediately attended to him. "The doctor says you are to take this," she announced. "What is it?" he mumbled. "It's a type of meal, I think," she said. "But it's only a tablet," he said. "Oh, please do it. I'm sure it's all right," she pondered. Cedric swallowed the tablet, then Victoria made him lie down again. Cedric had many questions, but Victoria insisted he sleep. She left the room and, amazingly, with all he had to think about, fell asleep. The tablet the doctor had given him was certainly making him feel better. It contained the component parts of a meal, and a little something to help him sleep. His head rested into the pillow, and he fell sound asleep. Although the TARDIS was infinite in size, they only really used the first few rooms. The third room from the console room was a bathroom, and inside was the Doctor. It was convenient having a bathroom so near the main doors. He found that after most of his adventures he got very dirty. He used a flannel to remove some dry mud from his face, and then he attended to the small cut on his forehead. Then he ran a comb through his hair before turning out the light and heading to the control room. The TARDIS had been stationary for some time. After leaving the castle, the Doctor had set the controls, and then gone off to wash. He checked the planetary readings, which were not good. Jamie and Victoria could last for a short time, but nowhere near a day. He crossed to the other side of the room and tapped a square plate on the wall, which opened to reveal a small shelf. The Doctor removed the contents from the second shelf and shut the compartment. Outside, a fierce wind was blowing. The ground had about 3 inches of snow covering it, and the whole area was dark, very dark indeed. From the darkness there came footsteps. An icy hand grabbed onto the door of the TARDIS. The hand belonged to an old man by the name of Titus. He had battled his way through the winds and by now was exhausted. Titus held on to the TARDIS for support as he rested for a moment. The wind picked up again and howled bitterly through the air. Titus remembered his purpose for coming out on such a frosty night. He reached into his pocket and produced a key. The key fitted perfectly in the lock of the TARDIS. Titus pushed the door open and fell through it. Nova pushed his hands closer to the fire, but he still felt a chill of coldness. He was often cold, as most of the inhabitants of the planet were. Their only heat came from a large drum with wood in it. His partner, Vega, entered the hut, carrying more wood. She sat down beside him and huddled near the fire. "Titus has gone missing," she explained. "He always goes missing, searching for that doctor of his," he said. "Poor Titus. I do believe he's lost his mind. He's as mad as a pimple pot," he sneered. The door flung open and the air killed the fire dead. Blackness instantly met them. Vega and Nova sat in the orange glow of the embers as the chill of the air stroked them. Then a channel of light entered the stone hut. It was one of the city's guardsmen. The inhabitants of the planet hated the guards for they wore thick woolly jackets and protected headgear. They also carried around with them a powerful stun gun for residents who were going to be aggressive. The man strolled into the hut and relit the fire for them. "Get something against this door, 'cause if your wood supply runs out you don't get any more," he snarled. "Yes, we are quite aware of that," replied Nova. "Just saying. Well, good evening," the guard responded. Titus was now sat in the chair with a couple of blankets around him. Jamie and Victoria sat beside him, but the doctor stood by the console, with a look of suspicion on his face. He tried to wonder how anyone could physically open the doors from the outside. The doors were always locked when they took off. He took the key he had just taken from Titus and eyed it carefully. It was truly amazing. The old man's key was a complete copy of his. Just then Cedric entered the control room, now dressed in a jumper and a kilt. Cedric had curly blonde hair and bright, bold eyes. He joined the doctor by the console. "Who's this doctor?" "Don't know. It's all very strange," he muttered. "Not half as strange as this temple you have here, Doctor." "Temple? This is the TARDIS, my spaceship," the doctor grunted. "Spaceship? What's one of those?" Cedric said. "Jamie, would you be so kind as to explain? I'd quite like a word with our new guests," he instructed. Jamie guided Cedric to another part of the control room. The doctor indicated Victoria to leave him, and the doctor knelt down beside Titus. Instantly, Titus grabbed the doctor's suit jacket. "My time is short, Doctor. I have waited many years for our meeting. I have come to warn you. Beware, Cedric. He is not all he seems. If he continues on your journey, he will kill one of your companions. Heed my warning." Titus collapsed into the chair and died. The doctor shut his eyes and stood up slowly, bemused by this strange warning. Victoria hurried over to Titus while the doctor collapsed into another chair, his mind racing with thought. By morning the wind had died down considerably and the temperature had risen slightly. Vega stepped outside and headed to the main dome. It was always a long walk to the dome, but it provided her with a job and something to do. She worked as a nurse in the medical ward of the main dome. If you were sick, you went there. That's if you got there in time. It took Vega 1 hour to get there and 1 hour back. The huts were hidden away so that the wealthier people on the planet didn't have to see them. She began her journey again as she had done for many days. Cedric had been the doctor's cellmate. He joined Cedric 3 days before they left. Cedric had been very welcoming to the doctor and eventually managed to set him free by beating up one of the guards. The guard had been more powerful, but the doctor had got away in time. The guard then beat Cedric half to death, leaving him in a bad way. The doctor thought he was a good man. He would sacrifice his own life to save others, but according to Titus he was destined to kill Jamie or Victoria. Cedric was the first out of the TARDIS. He circled it before putting both hands on his head in shock. The doctor followed, keeping a sharp eye on Cedric. The Doctor was followed by Victoria, who had changed into a somewhat Tudor gown, and then by Jamie, who hadn't changed at all. The four of them headed off down a path which had now become clear from snow. The planet was ruled by a short-tempered prince named Finnick. He lived on the top floor of the dome. He had many servants who were treated almost like rats. To Prince Finnick, servants were the lowest form of life. He tore the goblet from the tray and sipped the fine wine inside. He laid back in his throne and ran his palm over his chin. The people who resided in the dome were heated by giant panels which lined the walls. They also had better food which had been imported from other worlds. The prince gorged on food while many of his people died horribly from either frost or starvation. The people in the lower town lived off rations which the dome provided. The rations were tiny, and it wasn't enough to keep people living. Many of the residents of the lower town had complained to the other worlds, but the messages were intercepted by the prince, and the people responsible executed for treason. Titus had once said he had the power to contact people of other worlds, using his mind, but no one believed him. He had attempted once to do such a thing, and after trying with all his might fell unconscious. He did not wake for 5 days. The Doctor looked up as a small rectangular spaceship span through the sky. It stopped in mid-air and began descending towards the ground. From the hill they could see the rough distance between them and the spaceship. The Doctor suggested it might be almost a mile. Jamie darted off, pulling Victoria with him. The Doctor trotted after them, not thinking about Cedric, who had just tagged along with him. The dome doors opened and hordes of people bundled out. They all ran frantically in search of the ship. People never visited this planet. Food for the dome was delivered by transport, as were the important guests. The people gathered around the ship, pushing and shoving each other for a better view. The door of the spaceship opened, and 2 armoured figures walked out. The people gasped in terror, and some even fled. The 2 figures parted, and a much taller figure walked through. And they would have been the Ice Warriors, basically, because in episodes like The Curse of Peladon and Monsters of Peladon were sort of like galactic police in a way. So they were going to be the people who responded to Titus's messages from his mind, you see. And but I couldn't work out how to make them sound and things, so I just gave up with that. So I hope you enjoyed that story. I just wanted to share it with you because